He was warned not to do this. Remember now, he was given a bishop by John Paul II, and he reneged. What Lefebvre came out and said is, you know what, I rethought my position. I don't want one bishop on August 15th. I want 4 bishops on June 30th. So I want 3 more 6 weeks early. Why?
He said this to the Holy Father?
Well, this is practically what he presented, because that's what he ended up doing. He told Ratzinger, if you read the correspondence, which was another thing that really disturbed me when I started reading the correspondence with Cardinal Ratzinger and Archbishop Lefebvre, Rome was bending over backwards for him. And I even wondered why. Why were they so docile to this man who has rejected everything that they've commanded him to do for a dozen years? But it got to a point where Lefebvre has decided that he's going to go forward with these illicit consecrations. He was canonically warned that if he did so, he would be excommunicated. He went forward with the consecrations. And then Cardinal Ganton of the Congregation for Bishops declared that he had incurred this automatic censure of excommunication under 1364. His declaration is not imposing it. He's declared that it's already happened, okay? And then John Paul II Matt, came out with Ecclesia Dei Afflicta on July 2nd, the very next day, 1988, and solemnly confirmed
the church really moves that quickly.
Solemnly confirmed that Lefebvre had excommunicated himself. Now, we can explain why that is, and very briefly, I will just say, it's because, and John Paul II even says this in Ecclesia Dei Afflicta, it's because what Lefebvre did is a rejection of the Roman primacy, a usurpation of the Roman primacy. This is a very important point that I want all our society friends to understand. As I did my research on this and reading the encyclicals, particularly a number of encyclicals from Pius IX, who during his pontificate addressed many illicit consecrations during his pontificate. What he and others have taught, I can go to Pius VI, Pius IX, Pius XII, the Council of Trent, on and on and on. The magisterium has taught that just as Christ alone chose his apostles, so the vicar of Christ alone chooses the successors to the apostles. You see, just as Christ alone sends the apostles, so the vicar of Christ alone sends the apostles. It is a right of the Roman primacy, of the Roman pontiff who holds the office of the primacy. It is his sole and exclusive right to select, consecrate, and send bishops. That is a matter of divine law. When one consecrates a bishop contrary to the will of the Holy Father, they are usurping a right of the Roman primacy. You see, Pius VI, Pius IX says, Christ himself gave this right to Peter, to the office of Peter. This is a right that Christ himself is conferring upon the office of the primacy. That's how serious this is. You see, this was a weakness in Michael Davies' argument, may he rest in peace, right? He was an apologist for the society. And, he always referred to the fact that Archbishop Lefebvre didn't have an apostolic mandate to consecrate these bishops, and you don't need an apostolic mandate. You didn't in the early church, and not having an apostolic mandate isn't necessarily schismatic. That's true. Okay. In the early church, we didn't have this notion of apostolic mandate. A lot of times, especially in the East, bishops were just consecrated, always with the tacit approval of the Pope, never contrary to the will of the Pope. There's a difference. But there's also a difference, Matt, between consecrating a bishop without an apostolic mandate, which now under the Code of Canon Law is an offense that's subject to excommunication. That's not necessarily a schismatic act, though. Okay, we can bring up cases where Cardinal Wojtyła, when he was cardinal behind the Iron Curtain, he had consecrated evidently some bishops. Bishop Slippage.
Is this in Ukraine?
It was in that area in the East somewhere behind the Iron Curtain. And he didn't have an apostolic mandate. Now, why wasn't that schismatic?
Good question.
Well, the answer is because the Holy See said it wasn't. Because the Holy See accepted the consecrations, because they recognized that there were unique facts and circumstances there. It's ironic because Karol Wojtyła became Pope John Paul II. So he, of course, above anybody, would have known what necessity is all about, wouldn't he have? He, in fact, engaged in this very practice himself. But what he said, and this was not the situation behind the Iron Curtain, there was not a canonical warning not to do what he did. In Lefebvre's case, he was warned that we offered you one, you're now taking 3 more. No, this is contrary to the will of the Holy Father. If you do this, this is why Ecclesia de Afflicta, in one of the paragraphs, says, this constitutes a rejection of the Roman primacy. Okay? Now, we're not talking about ecclesiastical or human law here. This is what's so important, Matt. As I said, this is a matter of divine law. You can't get around this. The Pope alone has the right to select and consecrate and send bishops. Of course, he delegates the act of the episcopal consecration to bishops. That's something that he can delegate and often does delegate to other bishops. But they don't have a right to do it against his will. Okay, it's the Pope who decides who's going to enter into the College of Bishops because he's the head. You see, a bishop cannot enter into the College of Bishops against the will of the head of the college. It's absurd. It's absurd. This is the church. This is the church that Christ founded. And when we talk about the church, we primarily mean those 2 divine institutions that Christ gave us, the primacy of Peter and the episcopate, the College of Bishops. Those are the divine organs of the church that are directly created and instituted by Christ himself. And so this is why any usurpation or misappropriation of a right that only belongs to the Pope is necessarily schismatic. And I can think of nothing more serious other than a man claiming he's the Pope when he's an anti-Pope. Because when you're talking about usurping a right of the primacy, which regards the perpetuation of apostolic succession, okay, and the church's mission until the second coming. You don't get any more serious than that. We're talking about the divine constitution of the church here. This is why what Lefebvre did wasn't necessarily schismatic, because it was an attack on that divine constitution.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe or you're a dingus. What's a dingus exactly?
Used to refer to something one cannot or does not wish to name specifically.
You don't have to subscribe, but if you did, I'd love it. You dingus.
Like the video. That's who we're using that one. Take one.